On our planet, nights would still be completely dark if not this man. He developed the radio and wireless communication. He predicted drones, Wi-Fi and mobile phones. His name is used for streets, for a unit of physics, and for the most famous electric car in the world. But reality was not so sweet. The same man cheated his business partners, shocked himself with electricity, had strange phobias, was interested in the occult. He slept only 2 hours a night and probably stayed a virgin his whole life. Well, except for one romance. With a pigeon, he imagined crazy projects. Wanted to give free electricity to the whole planet. Said he saw ghosts and even talked with Martians. Some people even believe he was not from Earth at all. Only one person in history could be like this. His name was Nikola Tesla. First, he became one of the most famous scientists in the world. Then he fell into a total obscurity for 50 years. And finally, he came back and was almost raised to the level of a god in science. Why did the FBI take his papers right after his death? Who was Nikola Tesla really? Did he cause the Tunguska disaster in 1907? What do we know about his time machine? And was Nikola Tesla even Nikola Tesla? Or maybe his real name was Ramses II, the pharaoh of Egypt. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Tesla? A car? Exactly. And probably also that guy, Elon Musk, one of the richest men in the world. CEO of SpaceX, by the way, the company flying into space, and Tesla, the most famous electric car brand in the world. I mean, for the average person, the name of this brand sounds like a simple story. Once, there was a scientist named Tesla who played with electricity. Elon Musk admired him so much that he named his company after him. Sounds nice, right? But it's not true. Here's the shock. Elon Musk did not create Tesla. He joined later as an investor when the company already existed. Only after that, he became CEO. And second, Elon is not even a big fan of Nikola Tesla. In interviews, he says openly that he respects Thomas Edison much more. Yes, Edison, the same man who fought Tesla in a real war. And it was not just a metaphor, it was a bloody war. Even today, many people believe that Edison directly or indirectly was one of the reasons why Tesla died poor, without finishing his most crazy projects. What kind of projects? We are talking about things far beyond a normal laboratory. Energy, vibrations, electricity, contacts with Martians and Pigeons. I know it sounds wild, right, but who cares? After Tesla's death, the American FBI quickly took his notes and documents. Why? We don't know. From that moment, Tesla became a hero for conspiracy theorists. HARP, Area 51, pyramids, all of this is always connected to or with him. Why? To understand it, we must go back to the very beginning. Nikola Tesla was born in the middle of the 19th century in the small village of Smiljan, which at that time was part of the Austrian Empire. Today, it's in Croatia. That was a period when Central Europe was falling apart, by the way. The Habsburg monarchy was getting weaker and weaker. A few years earlier, the Hungarian uprising almost destroyed it, and only thanks to the Russian Tsar army it was saved. Saved, more like patched together with tape. Austria was seriously losing influence in Germany and in Italy. Its empire was shrinking, by the way. Tesla grew up in a deeply religious Orthodox family. His father was a priest and his mother came from family with many priests too. But the interesting thing is that it was his mother who had an amazing memory and real technical talent. She made her own tools for faster spinning and weaving, special spindles, needles, hooks, embroidery tools, full package. She could even memorize whole pages of text, but in that time and in such a village, nobody thought a woman could use such skills. Her place was in the kitchen, nothing more. So Nikola was the fourth child in the family. He had three sisters, Milka, Angelina, and Marika, and one older brother, Dane, who was the parents' golden child. People even said that Dane, or Daniel sometimes, it depends on country, Dane was more talented than Nikola. Sadly, when Nikola was 5 years old, something happened that would mark him for life. One day, his 12-year-old brother took him for a horse ride. Nikola, as a joke, scared the horse. The animal panicked, threw Dane off and crushed his skull, all in front of little Nikola. You could say that in some way, even if not on a purpose, Nikola caused his brother's death. This trauma stayed with him for the rest of his life. But that was not all. When Tesla was 17, just after finishing school and dreaming about university, he got cholera. For almost 9 months he stayed in bed, weak, with cramps and vomiting. Many times he was very close to death. He survived, but from that moment he had an obsessive fear of germs. He was so afraid of bacteria that if a fly landed near his food in a restaurant, he made them throw the whole meal away and cook it again. And on top of that, he had strange neurological gifts. As a teenager, he had visions, flashes of light and sudden words in his head, like maybe some kind of computer glitch. Sometimes it gave him real pain, changed the way he saw the world, and made it hard to read or think. At night, he said that instead of sleeping normally, he moved to the other worlds and lived there a second life. He believed it was something unique, like a connection with a being. If you ask me, those psychological shocks in childhood and youth push him later into kind of obsession. But okay, Tesla was always the best in school. His favorite subject, no surprise, it was physics and chemistry, okay? But when he finally beat cholera, instead of running to study, he stayed 1 year in the village, avoiding the army. 1 year later, he went to university in Austria. At first, it looked great. Tesla studied hard, absorbed books like a vacuum cleaner. But then, in the third year, everything collapsed. Now you probably think he dropped out because he was such a genius and rebel. But no, the image of Tesla as a lonely genius who spent all his life with books and machines is in many ways a myth. In reality, he played cards for weeks, drank and surrounded himself with women. Which is strange because even with this lifestyle, Tesla probably stayed a virgin until the end of his life. He often said that celibacy helped him focus on science and that he avoided physical relations with women. But in one word, he partied. No surprise that he lost his scholarship and was finally kicked out of the university with a bang. For the next year, Tesla worked in poor jobs, small repairs, telegraph works and simple workshop tasks. Later, he felt ashamed of his time and did not write much about it in his memoirs. He preferred to show himself as a genius, always one step ahead. But karma was waiting for him and would come back in a few years. One day, tired and bored, Tesla met some old school friends. They told his parents what really happened to him. Shocked, his parents brought him home and pushed him to try again, to enter another university and start fresh. But spoiler, Tesla never entered that second university. So young Nikola was talented, full of ideas, but without clear direction, without discipline, and most of all, without money. I mean, universities were just too expensive for him. Finally, something changed. He got a job in a small industrial company in Prague. Even without a diploma, he did great with mechanics and electricity. It was clear this was his real passion. Step by step, he moved higher and higher until friends helped him get a position in the Paris branch of the company owned by Thomas Edison himself. Young Nikola Tesla spent the next few years there, working with a top technology of that time, making light bulbs, building small power stations and installing streetlights. Back then, this was a real hype, like today's artificial intelligence or dot-com bubble boom. Cities were racing to be the first electric streetlights. For investors, it was a gold mine, and for engineers like Tesla, it was a dream. One light bulb cost as much as a few days of work for a normal worker. So Tesla was a great engineer, but he was not the type for a corporate life. Not because he lacked skills, but because he had too many. He did not want limits. In his head, he had plans decades ahead. He wanted to change the world. So he borrowed money from his family, and in 1884, at the age of 28, he took a steamship to New York. Why? Because in the USA worked his idol, Thomas Edison. For most people today, Edison is simply the man with a light bulb, but that is not fair. First, the light bulb was invented before Edison worked on it. Second, he was much more than that, a bit like Elon Musk, but squared. An inventor, a media figure, and the symbol of progress. In the mid-1880s, Edison was not even 40, but his company had already created the phonograph, the first machine to record sound, like an early gramophone, and a new electric lamp that lasted much longer than earlier versions. Edison was ready to light the whole planet with electric bulbs. The press called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. Thousands of young dreamers from around the world rushed to his labs, hoping for a job, just like with Elon Musk today. One of these dreamers was Nikola Tesla. He came from Europe without a diploma, but with a head full of ideas and a heavy accent, like mine. At first, Edison had doubts, but in the end, he gave Tesla a chance. Tesla got a job in Edison's company, right in the center of the hottest technological revolution of that time, electrification. But Tesla did not stay long. After only a few months, he left. Why? Historians still argue. According to Tesla, a manager promised him a bonus of $50,000 if he improved the generators. That is about $1.5 million today. Worth it, right? Tesla did improve the generators, but suddenly nobody remembered the bonus. Later, biographies added a twist that Edison himself laughed at Tesla and said, "It was only a joke, Nikola." But in Tesla's own autobiography, he never wrote that Edison said it. So maybe it was just legend. But one thing is sure, Tesla went to Edison hoping to share his biggest idea, the system of alternating current. This was something that could change, and in fact did change, the lives of people all over the world. But Edison still preferred direct current. He had already invested a lot in it. The first practical power station, Pearl Street in New York, built in 1882, cost about $300,000. Today, that would be, I don't know, maybe $8 to $10 million. Quite a lot, right? And in the 1880s, only a small group of enthusiasts believed in alternating current. They did not even have a good way to control it. In short, alternating current was risky ground. But why, Simon, in this film about Tesla do we talk much about Edison? What does this have to do with UFOs, mysticism, and Tesla's pigeon wife? Everything is connected, really. And we must start with electricity, because it was the heart of Tesla's biggest fight with Edison. Their visions of electricity were so different that they started what we now call the War of Currents. During this war, many animals and sadly also people would die. Tesla's relationship with his idol Edison turned into open hostility. As the saying goes, never meet your idol. That is the best way to describe their relationship, or rather, their rivalry. A rivalry that forever changed our civilization. To understand the direct current, let's go back to the 1870s. At that time, Nikola Tesla was studying at the Polytechnic School in Graz, Austria, the same one he would later be expelled from. He was still a serious student, not only learning physics and engineering, but also reading a lot. He supposedly mastered 9 languages and read Goethe, Shakespeare, Voltaire, and he had a special trait. If he started one author, he had to read everything by him. Today, we would call this, in my opinion, obsessive-compulsive disorder or OCD, but okay, this obsessive nature and his many fears stayed with him for his life. But his biggest obsession became electricity. For him, it was like artificial intelligences for us today, okay? So imagine a simple setup. You have a small motor and you want it to spin. For this, you need electricity, so you connect a battery. Boom, you have a closed circuit. Electrons start to flow from one side of the battery through the wires, reach the motor, and make it move. In this case, everything flows in one direction, calm and steady. You can imagine it like water flowing through a pipe, always in the same way, without changes. That is direct current. On a graph, it looked like a straight horizontal line, always at the same level, always the same flow of energy in one direction. Now we enter a differently alternating current. This time you have a light bulb connected to the wall socket. You flip the switch and magic begins. Electrons start to move, but they do not flow in just one direction. In alternating current, the trick is that the flow changes direction all the time. Electrons go to the right, then to the left, and back again, very fast. On a graph, it looked like waves, going up and down again and again. These are sine waves. What's interesting is that at the peak of a wave, when the push of electron is the strongest in one direction or the other, the bulb shines the strongest or the brightest. Then it becomes a little weaker. But this happens so fast, 50 or 60 times per second. It's okay, you understand, it's 50-60 hertz depending on the country, that your eyes cannot see the difference. For us, the light look perfectly stable. The voltage changes its sign all the time. Positive, negative, positive again. Electrons are pulled one way and then the other. But the important thing is that they flow through the resistor. In this case, the filament in the bulb. This movement hits the wire until it glows. It's simply hitting the material with current. In alternating current, the heating comes from both sides. But for us, the result is constant light. Of course, modern LEDs are different. They don't shine from heat at all. There, electricity makes a process called electroluminescence. Electrons jump to the higher energy level, and when they return, they emit photons. But okay, here we are talking about a classic light bulb, okay? LEDs are topic for maybe another episode. But why am I saying this, and what does it all have to do with Tesla and Edison? To understand it, we must go back to the late 1870s. After the success of Edison's phonograph and his own voice being recorded for the first time, a bigger breakthrough was waiting: electric light. Of course, people already used gas lamps or oil lamps to light the streets, but they were expensive, dirty with soot, and they smelled bad. The idea of an electric bulb already existed, but only in Edison's lab was one made that could shine for up to 1,000 hours. At that time, it felt like magic, but the bulb was only the beginning. Edison had to create a whole system around it. Generators, distribution stations, kilometers or miles of cables, insulators, fuses, and here the real problem started. In the early 1880s, Edison Company began to electrify part of Manhattan. The plans were huge. Millions of bulbs, hundreds of thousands of homes. But very quickly, a giant problem appeared. Edison was a strong supporter of direct current. and DC had one big weakness. The longer the distance, the weaker the power. Why? Because wires have resistance and energy turns into heat. With a normal copper cable of that time, after only 2 kilometers, you could lose up to 40% of the power in the wire. That means only 60% reached the lamp, and the further you went, the worse it got. To fix this, Edison had to push very high current, sometimes up to 2000 amperes. That meant cables had to be very thick, more than 10 square centimeters, and copper was extremely expensive. On top of that, Edison needed to build generators almost every few blocks just to keep the voltage alive, okay? And imagine it, in every district, giant machines, noisy, hot and dirty, working day and night. People might love the light, but not the idea of living next to such monsters. And the worst part was that this system only worked in dense cities. If you lived 10 or 15 kilometers away, forget about electricity. You still used gas, oil, or the hope that maybe one day they will build a power station here. Meanwhile, young Tesla had already been working on alternating current. He knew that in nature, electricity is by definition a wave. It rises and falls, it changes direction, and AC had one huge advantage. With transformers, you could raise the voltage to thousands of volts, even 10,000 or 20,000 volts, and then send it hundreds of kilometers with almost no loss. The higher the voltage, the lower the current, and smaller the heat losses in the wire. Then, near the city, you could lower the voltage back to 110 or 220 volts and safely send it into houses. Thin, cheap wires, no need for a generator every street. For Edison, this was heresy, because at that time, AC sounded like death itself. The lines were poorly insulated. Touch them by accident and you were gone. This is why, after trying to explain it, Tesla finally left Edison's company. If Edison did not accept AC, Tesla saw no chance to develop his idea there. But Edison had his reasons. First, he was honestly afraid of AC, because yes, alternating current is more dangerous to human than direct current. Second, all his businesses was already built on DC. Switching to AC would destroy everything he had created. And third, some say Edison never really understood how alternating current worked, so he simply stuck to what he knew, okay? The fact is, Edison did not have much formal education. Not even college, just 3 months of school. His teacher said young Thomas was too stupid to learn, but his mother stepped in. She taught him herself and, more importantly, gave him the belief that he was special. That he had to prove the world was wrong. Maybe it was her ambition, or maybe she wanted to show that her son was not just special, but truly exceptional. I don't know. What I do know is that Edison was the classic American dream. A boy with no diploma who reached everything through wild curiosity and an even wilder character. Edison liked to say, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." He worked like crazy and did everything by trial and error. Later, Tesla joked that Edison, instead of searching for a needle in a haystack, preferred to dig through the whole haystack, straw by straw, until he found the needle. Tesla was very different, a typical brainiac, but terrible at sales and business. While Edison counted every bulb and every dollar, Tesla never looked at his inventions as products to sell. For him, the only thing that mattered was the big mystery of the universe. And of course, being cheated out of $50,000. About 1.5 million today, so well, I would be angry too, okay? After this incident and the lack of faith in alternating current, Tesla left Edison, started his own company, and began collecting his first patents, so he could finally work in peace. And that is true. Tesla received his first patents for inventions connected to alternating current, generators, transformers and motors, all with the potential to revolutionize energy. But this was not yet the moment when he became rich and famous. At first, he met three investors: Robert Lane, Benjamin Vail and Charles Peck. Together, they founded Tesla Electric Light and Manufacture. These men had very simple goals. They wanted Tesla to improve arc lamps. At that time, arc lamps were hot technology. They shined with huge light for streets and halls, but they often exploded and used enormous amount of power. So Tesla worked with passion with it. He designed a new type of regulator and dynamo, filed patents, and the inventors were happy. At least until they realized they could sell it and cash out. But in alternating current, in his main vision of global energy transmission, they did not believe at all. They only wanted quick money from lamps. So at some point, they told Tesla, listen, thanks for everything, but now you are on your own. The company was closed. They kept the rights to his patent because of the contract, and Nikola was left with nothing. No royalties, no company, no money. For someone like him, it was a knockout. And now imagine, what did he do next? You won't guess. He started digging dishes for cable for the Edison illuminating company. Seriously, for $2 a day, which today would be about 70. At that time it was normal pay for a worker, but for an engineer it was a disaster, and sometimes he still had no food to eat. But then the story turned. Luckily, at that time in the USA, more and more people started saying that alternating current was the future. The limits of direct current, short distance and endless power stations were too much. Nobody wanted a giant plant every 50 or 500 meters. Okay? So Tesla found two new inventors, Alfred Brown and Charles Clark. They thought that this Serbian could one day bring them a fortune. They offered him a deal. They would give him capital about $30,000, equal to 1 million today, and in return they would get half the rights to all his alternating current patents. If it worked, everyone would be happy, and it was. Tesla's new patents quickly started to spread through the industry, until they finally landed on the desk of George Westinghouse. This man, the man who at that time practically owned the Americans' railroad, he was tough. He had made a huge fortune thanks to his air brakes and inventions that literally saved trains from hundreds of disasters. In just a few years, he built a fortune worth many millions of dollars back then, which today would mean billions, I think. That gave him the capital to invest in anything that could be the next big breakthrough. And now, Westinghouse felt that electricity was the next big thing. Something that could bring him even more wealth. But the problem was one. There was one problem. George was not a great scientist for a visionary. He was first of all a businessman with a sharp sense for profit. For a long time, he invested in both direct current and alternating current at the same time, because he was not sure which system would win in the end. It took another 2 or 3 years before Tesla and his partners finally convinced him that the real key is to conquering the whole market, or the real key to conquering the whole market, was alternating current. Why? Because in Tesla's induction motor, which not only lit lamps, but this motor could also power it machine in factories and in transformers, which made it possible to send electricity 10 times further than Edison's system, with the same loss of power. No need for cables as thick as an arm, less copper needed, and no noise of giant generators next to every block because power plants could be far from the city. Finally, after years, Westinghouse said, okay, we take it. He put $60,000 in cash on the table, equal to about $2 million today. But that was only the start. The most important part was the contract for royalties, and it was written in a brilliantly simple way. For every horsepower of power in motor and generators using Tesla's technology, Tesla would get $2.50. To make you feel it, at that time, every factory, every mill, every city lighting system needed motors and generators with power in tens, hundreds, and then thousands of horsepower. It was like getting commission from every new car on the road, but instead of one engine, you got paid for every unit of power in the growing infrastructure of the whole world. Tesla now had the chance to become a multimillionaire, and in today's world, almost a billionaire. So Westinghouse placed all his bets on alternating current, and that was how the real war began. Because for Edison, this was the moment to defend his empire at any cost. Edison launched an entire black PR campaign. He publicly electrocuted dogs, cats, pigs with alternating current, and then went one step further into the worst possible demonstration in the whole history of this war. In 1903, Edison organized the public execution of an elephant named Topsy. She had been sentenced to death after killing several people, but in truth, she was only defending herself from cruel treatment in the circus. One of the killed was a drunk keeper who tried to put a lit cigarette in her mouth. A crowd gathered to watch as 6,060 volts of alternating current passed through the elephant's body until she fell dead to the ground. Of course, all of it was recorded on camera, so the film could be sent to newspapers as final proof that Tesla's and Westinghouse system was the fastest way to the grave. And you know what? He was partly right, because with the technology of that time, weak insulation and no protection, AC really could kill instantly. But the way Edison used it was, let's say, brutal. Edison did not stop there and came up with an even darker idea. He involved his company in the project of the electric chair. Naturally, it was powered by alternating current, so that everyone would see how it could instantly kill a human being, at least in theory, because in practice nobody knew the right voltage or how long the current should flow, which was shown in 1890. That year, the first execution in history was carried out on the electric chair. The victim was William Kemmler, who had killed his partner with a hatchet in a jealous rage. It was supposed to be quick, but it turned into a nightmare. They did not know what voltage to use. His body began to burn and spark. Later, they increased the voltage and finally finished the job, but it was still horrible. And the biggest paradox? Edison's plan partly worked. People began to fear alternating current, and George Westinghouse, its main supporter, found himself in real trouble. Not only did he have to save the reputation of the whole system, but his company was also caught in a storm of expensive lawsuits. Everyone claimed that they, not Tesla, had invented the induction motor, transformers, or transmission systems. In the end, the courts gave the rights to Tesla, but the battles took years. During that time, Westinghouse reportedly came to Tesla with an unusual request. He asked him to give up the legendary royalties, $2 or $2.50 for every horsepower of power produced with his patents. Remember, in today's money that would be about $60 per horsepower. Tesla, they say, simply waved it off and agreed because he cared more about pushing technology forward than counting dollars. What's wrong with him? If that was true, it was the worst financial decision of his life, I think. If he had kept even a small percentage, his fortune would have been counted in millions or billions today. He could have spent his whole life chasing his wildest vision, but instead he was left almost with nothing. What's wrong with him? And yet, We must give credit to Westinghouse. He was the first to truly believe in Tesla. He put massive money into alternating current at a time when it was far from obvious. Without him, the technology might have been lost, and maybe today we would still ride trams with cables as thick as an arm, powered by noisy generators every few streets. Or maybe not, because, history does not like a vacuum. If not Tesla, then probably someone else. In 1893, Tesla and his alternating current entered a true golden age. First came the World's Fair in Chicago. This was the event where America wanted to show it was decades ahead of the rest of the world in technology. Companies competed for the contracts to light the whole fair. And guess what? Westinghouse won with Tesla's system. At the fair, they installed several generators designed by Nikola. Together, they produced about 18 megawatts of powers. To compare, today that would be enough to power a medium-sized city, or the same as 8, maybe 10 wind turbines. But back then, in 1893, people were shocked. In one night, Chicago shined brighter than any city before. Crowds looked at the sea of lights with open mouths, as if they had just seen a real dragon. A few months later, Tesla and Westinghouse got something even bigger. The contract to build a giant hydroelectric power plant at Niagara Falls. Hundreds of tons of water falling every second turned turbines, and those rotated massive generators. And inside, magnets and coils created alternating magnetic fields which induced alternating electric current. And that's how electricity was born. Pure, green electricity, Europe. Yeah, I'm European, so we have huge problem with green energy. But okay, it's topic for another episode. So much electricity, alternating current, that they could light almost the whole northeast of the United States. It was a real triumph over nature. At least the power of the falls was captured. And most important, it was clean, pure green energy. Checkmate, Europe. What about Edison? Well, the truth is, the world of currents had already been decided a few years earlier, before Chicago and Niagara became reality. Even his own company, General Electric, had started to invest in alternating current. Edison had to leave it in the end. In practice, it was like officially admitting defeat. A bit sad, I think, considering how legendary Edison already was. But on the other hand, maybe better to have money than to be right. And in the end, he had neither. Not completely, okay? Because direct current is still very important for us today. But more about that in a moment. Give me a couple seconds. Every time you turn on the light or plug something into a socket, whether you are in New York, in a small village in Poland, or in a research station, it is in large part thanks to the vision and determination of Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, I think. And speaking of sockets and electronics, most of our home devices actually do not work on alternating current that comes from the wall, but on direct current, Edison's direct current. That is why on the cable of your laptop or your computer you see a black box, the adapter. That is where AC is turned into DC, which powers your devices. So don't think of Edison as a fool. Direct current is still very useful. All computers, all TVs, consoles, smartphones, tablets, Bluetooth speakers, chargers, all of them work on direct current. Batteries and accumulators always give direct current. Solar panels? The same. We use alternating current only because it's easier and cheaper to send over long distances. Then at home or inside the device, it's changed into direct current by rectifiers inside the power supplies. But let's go back to the end of the 19th century. In the 1890s, Tesla became a real celebrity. He received American citizenship. He was still under 40 and he was already part of New York's elite. He lived in the luxury Waldorf Astoria hotel, dined in the most expensive restaurants, and was always perfectly dressed. In conversation, Tesla was an absolute killer. He spoke several languages, could recite pages of poetry and prose from memory, and discussed music, art, philosophy, technology, everything. You might think his private life was just as colorful, but no, nothing could be farther from the truth. They wrote him letters, invited him to parties, and there were even rumors that married ladies were ready to forget about their husbands for Tesla. But Tesla was not interested. Some rumors suggest that maybe he was homosexual, but today's biographers mostly agree. He was simply 100% absorbed in his ideas. He once said that he could not be with a woman because he would have to love her as much as he loved his ideas, and that for him was impossible. On top of that, Tesla had so many quirks and phobias that it would not have been easy for anyone to live with him. He was an obsessive germophobe. He forced waiters to bring him dozens of napkins at once and counted exactly how many times he washed his hands. It always had to be a multiple of 3. In fact, everything in his life had to be divided by 3. Walking around a building 3 times before entering, choosing hotel rooms with numbers divisible by 3, even counting sips of water or bites of food at a table. Maybe it was some kind of trauma after his illness in youth, but I don't think so. Maybe he was a little bit. And there was more, what today we would call strong OCD. Tesla could not stand touching other people's hair. He was disgusted by the sight of women's earrings, beards, or jewelry. He followed a whole list of strict rules that gave him rhythm to his life, but to others looked like a total obsession. Interestingly, all of this was only the beginning of his later relationship, but not the ones you might expect. There was no woman, there were pigeons, or to be precise, one special pigeon. But I will tell you about that later. Because after his greatest achievements, the ones that put him forever into the history of science, you might think the story is finished. But it's not. His whole legend is built on alternating current. Yet, the strangest part of Tesla's life begins only after that, because after electricity comes Martians, mysticism, and the whole bizarre world of conspiracies. By the end of the 19th century, Tesla was an absolute star of the New York's high society. Sure, people whispered about his eccentrics, but that only added to his aura of mystery. Balls and banquets had 2 advantages for him. First, Tesla loved the elegant lifestyle, fine dining and luxury hotels. And second, those events were the equivalent of what we would call networking today, on steroids networking, but okay. At those parties, he met not only the famous Mark Twain, with whom he became friends, but also true business giants like JP Morgan. His demonstration looked like pure magic to audience of the late 19th century. Tesla would hold lamps in his hands that lit up by themselves, without any wires. In his laboratory, coals spewed out massive bolts of lightning. The man let electricity flow through his body and glowed like a Christmas tree, or like a dashboard of an old BMW F46. For people who just a few years earlier had lit their homes with kerosene and lamps, this was like watching Jesus walk on water. Or like us today, staring at the latest Android robots powered by AI. Of course, it wasn't a miracle, it was physics. Tesla's shows relied mainly on 3 tricks. The first was his legendary coil, a powerful resonant transformer that could generate voltages of hundreds of thousands. Operating at high frequencies, the effect was simple. Lightning bolts leaping several meters, just like in Frankenstein movies. The second trick was gas-filled lamps, prototypes of fluorescence tubes. which glowed without being physically connected to wires. It was enough for Tesla to hold them near the electric field generated by his coil. That is exactly how today's neon lights or fluorescent lamps work. The gas inside glows when electricity passed through it. And the third trick, the electricity running through his body. Tesla was clever here. He used high frequency current, but at low power. That kind of current bypasses internal organs and flows along the skin's surface. Thanks to that, Tesla could light up lamps in his hands without dying like a convict in the electric chairs. Though he admitted it was sometimes painful and left burns. And these demonstrations of what he called cold light, in contrast to the yellow warm light of regular bulbs, impressed people so much that John Jacob Astor, one of the richest men in the world, gave Tesla $100,000, which today would be about $3 million. And Tesla convinced him that if electricity was going to conquer the world, millions of such lamps would be needed and his technology was cheaper and more efficient. But the problem was Tesla didn't want the money to mass-produce lamp and make a fortune. No, what he had in mind was something much bigger. Something that was supposed to reach the entire planet. Tesla had a vision even crazier than anything he had done before. He believed that light, electricity, sound and images, all of it was just different forms of energy. And if that was true, then it should be possible to transmit them through the air without any wires. And most importantly, practically for free. So in 1899, Tesla left behind New York banquets, luxury hotels and wealthy society and went into complete wilderness. He ended up in a small forgotten town in Colorado Springs, known today mainly because Tesla built his most outrageous experiment there. Most of you probably know two famous photos of Tesla. One is his classic portrait that circulates as meme with captions like "the genius who discovered the secrets of the pyramids." And the other, that's that legendary photo of Tesla sitting calmly in a chair reading a book while his coil hurls lightning bolts several meters long right next to him. But here's the truth. That photo was one of the first photo montages. They took two negatives, one of the coil alone and another of Tesla, and combined them. Because if he had really sat there, he would have been fried in seconds. Like like a chicken. But the question is, why was he building all of this in the first place? Tesla's laboratory in Colorado Springs was the temple of his greatest dream. He wanted to transmit electricity across the entire world, without wires and without utility bills. His idea was that any device, anywhere on the planet, could simply draw power straight from the air. Tesla believed that Earth and the ionosphere formed a kind of giant resonance circuit, like a planetary capacitor. He thought he could excite it so that electricity would bounce back thousands of kilometers away. And this was no toy. His largest coil was nearly 20 meters, 65 feet in diameter, and the voltages he generated reaches up to 12 million volts. During one experiment, Tesla pumped so much power into the system that he blew up the local power station, plunging all of Colorado Springs into darkness. And people still tell stories that at that time, sparks were jumping between horses and metal fences several kilometers away. Tesla later claimed he was on the verge of making it all work, that he could have truly delivered electricity over vast distances, without wires and without charging a cent. The problem? He never provided any hard proof. Today we know that in practice, transmitting power that way would have been wildly inefficient. The energy losses would have been enormous, with most of it simply leaking into space. But in Colorado Springs, Tesla was convinced he was about to change the fate of the entire planet. And in a way, it's good he dreamed so big, in my opinion, because thanks to this vision we still have the legend of a Tesla, not just a dry entry in a physics textbooks. Even today, if you toss his name into a discussion about pyramids or UFO, people perks up and think, wait, Tesla wasn't full, maybe there's something to this. But okay, imagine cell phone, GSM signals, coverage. They pass freely through walls, houses, offices, and no one bats an eye. Tesla saw it the same way, a world full of waves carrying both power and information, all without wires. Only there's one tiny detail. A phone signal has power in the range of milliwatts, sometimes just 2-3 watts. Basically no more than the light bulb inside your fridge, and often a million times less, I think. That's why you can safely walk through it and stand in the field of those waves and it doesn't fry you. Now imagine those some waves carrying enough energy to light up a bulb or to run a refrigerator. That would mean the same amount of energy passing straight through our bodies. No, exactly a present thought, right? That's why we have wires underground and on poles, which insulators and entire modern power grid. Otherwise, instead of electricity in your socket, you would have electricity in your body. And even if we set aside a health issue, transmitting that much energy through the air simply doesn't make sense. The losses would be massive. Most of it just get absorbed by the atmosphere and turned into heat, slightly warming the air instead of powering your lamp. And don't worry, to be clear, it's not like Earth would suddenly become a giant oven and we would all get roasted. Even today, all of humanity together, put with all our power plants and factories, uses about 20 terawatts. That's nothing compared to what the sun constantly delivers to Earth, around 174,000 terawatts. Our needs are literally a drop in the ocean, but locally, if Tesla had built thousands of such towers and blasted energy into the air, the surrounding area could have gotten a few degrees warmer. Maybe even global warming would have some competition, except instead of powering your desk lamp, most of that energy would have gone into hitting mosquitoes and the atmosphere. But still, that doesn't stop modern conspiracy fans from saying, hey, Tesla wanted to give people free electricity, but the capitalists blocked him because they wanted to squeeze money out of us. And yes, some electricity tycoons were genuinely curious about what Tesla once was up to, but ultimately it wasn't greed that killed his dreams. Tesla's biggest enemies turns out to be physics, along with his own overblown imagination. And Tesla's imagination really did run wild. Colorado Springs was the perfect example. When he experimented there with massive coils and built an electric field so strong that sparks were leaping across the kilometers, he began to claim that he said that he picked up signals from Mars. Yes, seriously. Newspapers had a field day. Here was one of the greatest minds of Earth declaring, "I have heard Martians." What was it really? Today we know that Tesla probably picked up radio noise from the sun or from distant stars, or perhaps even some of the earliest transmissions from Earth itself, since radio was just starting to take off at the time. But more on that in a moment, because Tesla invented a radio too. Among Tesla's more curious inventions was the world's first remotely controlled boat, basically a 19th century drone. He demonstrated it at Madison Square Garden. The audience was convinced there had to be a monkey inside pulling strings, or that Tesla was steering it telepathically, but he just smiled and said this was only the beginning, that in the future wars would be fought with machines' guides by radio waves. And he wasn't wrong. By 1900s, Tesla was in his early 40s and in serious trouble. Colorado Springs had ended with a spectacular blackout for the entire city and a bill that no one wanted to pay. Yet, in Tesla's mind, the same obsession remained: wireless transmission of energy, global, for everyone, for free. The problem was, after a few newspaper articles about his supposed contact with Martians and lack of any hard evidence, Tesla had gained a new reputation: the mad inventor. Investors started to see him as a man who would burn through their money rather than deliver a working product. But Tesla still had an ace up his sleeve. An old trick from the days when he was first building his empire: sell a simple dream while secretly working on the big plan. This time, the dream was a wireless telegraph. something like radio, and he found a man willing to finance it, the legendary JP Morgan. Morgan put up $150,000, about 5 million today, to create a modern system for transmitting messages without cables. In other words, the radio, the very invention for which Marconi, using Tesla patents, would later win the Nobel Prize. Seriously. But Morgan gave a warning. Nikola, this is all you will get. There won't be any more money. Tesla nodded. But inside, he already had his own plan. He built Wardenclyffe, a gigantic tower on Long Island that looked like a Tesla coil crossed with a Gothic Frankenstein castle. At night, powerful flashes lit up the sky. The Tesla was testing his discharges, hoping to prove a system capable of sending both power and transmission across the Atlantic. But Wardenclyffe was never just about telegraph. In Tesla's mind, it was the first step toward a worldwide network for energy transmission. He envisioned a future when anyone could drive a metal rod into the ground and draw electricity straight from the air. Seriously, that was his ultimate goal. Morgan, however, wasn't a visionary. He was a banker. He wanted concrete results that would make money. And when Tesla started talking about a planetary energy grid and about possibly picking up signals from Mars, Morgan decided this was going way too far. He stopped funding. To make matters worse, around the same time, Guglielmo Marconi successfully transmitted his signal across the Atlantic, winning worldwide fame and eventually a Nobel Prize for inventing radio. Yet his apparatus was built using components already patented by Tesla. That's why today's historians are unclear. Tesla fully deserved to be called a co-founder of radio, but back then words didn't matter anyone. Wardenclyffe stalled, Tesla fell into debt, and his grand vision faded along with the spark from his tower. When the money for Wardenclyffe finally ran out, Tesla once again sat across from JP Morgan with the same plea as always, just a little more fundings. This time he dropped the cover story. He revealed his full plan: a global wireless energy grid, electricity in the air, and no bills. A beautiful idea, I know, but to Morgan, this was too unreal, too impossible to measure, and above all, too risky. So instead of Tesla, Morgan invested in Marconi, ironically in technology that rested on Tesla's patents. Tesla tried to find new investors, but few wanted to risk backing a man the press now portrayed more as an eccentric visionary obsessed with outer space than a solid practical engineer. And that was exactly the moment when those alternating current royalties, the ones Tesla had once given up in the name of a greater cause, would have come in handy. Thought, knowing Tesla, he probably would have poured them straight into more wild experiments. Maybe they would have paid off, maybe not, we will never know. As the years went on, Tesla drifted further into esoteric territory. He became fascinated in Eastern philosophy, vibrations, energy, and the soul. He spoke of communicating with the spirits of his mother, believed telepathy was possible, and even announced plans to build a device that could telegraph or photograph human thoughts. Today, that sounds like a pure science fiction, I know, but back then, not quite as outlandish. It's impossible to remember that this was a time when serious professors debated the existence of Martians. No probes had been set yet into orbit, and electromagnetic waves were still a great novelty. If a radio signal could be sent and received hundreds of kilometers away, why not from mind to mind? It was natural. Among the intellectual elite, such ideas were in fashion. But the early 20th century was a strangely optimistic period. I will definitely cover it again on this channel, maybe when we talk about the history of gamma radiation. But for now, let's stick with Tesla. Rumors even emerged that Tesla had something to do with the 1908 explosion in Siberia, the Tunguska event. Some people speculated that it wasn't a meteor exploding in the atmosphere as most scientists now believe, but rather the result of an experiment at Wardenclyffe. The problem? Tesla had ended those experiments year earlier. He wasn't working on anything like that. Fun theory, of course, but mostly just meme material for conspiracy buffs or for a clicky thumbnail. And since we are talking about coincidences, it's It's worth noting, John Jacob Astor, who once financed Tesla, died on the Titanic in 1912. Meanwhile, JP Morgan, who had also been scheduled to sail, changed his mind at the last minute. Of course, conspiracy theorists spun their own version, that the Titanic was sunk deliberately to cut off Tesla's funding. Yeah, people can get pretty creative with it. But okay, back to the Pigeons. Yes, the Pigeons. In his final years, Tesla lived surrounded by them, and surrounded is putting it mildly. He brought sick birds into his hotel room, fed them, nursed them back to health, even slept with them nearby. His windows were always left wide open so they could fly in and out freely. Yet one pigeon, or rather one dove, was special. Tesla said he loved her as a man loves a woman. He claimed that whatever he called her, she would immediately come to him. He was convinced she understood him, that she was his partner, his one true love. One day, this dove flew into his room, and Tesla believed she had come to say goodbye. She died in his arms. At that moment, he said, he saw a beam of light in her eyes, brighter than all the lightning he had ever created in his laboratory. Romantic, haunting, and deeply unsettling. But for Tesla, that was the breaking point. From that day, as he wrote, life lost its meaning. And here's another twist. Tesla despised Einstein's theories. The new physics, especially Einstein's relativity, he dismissed as a mathematical dream. By then, thought the scientific community had stopped listening to him. They saw him as a crank. He ended up alone, living off debts, moving from one cheap hotel to an even cheaper one. His closest companions were pigeons. From time to time he was remembered, invited to ceremonies or honored at events. On his 75th birthday, Tesla even appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and some of the world's greatest scientists sent him congratulatory notes. But those were gestures of respect for past achievements, not genuine belief in his current ideas. Tesla died alone, penniless, in a New York hotel room at the age of 86. But the story didn't end there. After his death, the FBI entered his room and seized all his documents. Rumors spread that among the papers were designs from a terrifying death ray, capable of shooting down airplanes from hundreds of kilometers away. And there's a kernel of truth in that. Tesla himself claimed until the end of his life that he was working on a weapon so powerful it would end all wars, because it was too dreadful for anyone to dare to use. It sounds like the prologue to a Marvel movie, but at the time, people took it seriously. The real reason for the FBI's interest, however, was far more mundane. Politics, I mean. Tesla's nephew, Sava Kosanovic, was a Yugoslav diplomat in the United States, and he didn't hide his sympathy for communism. And this was during the early stages of America's Red Scare. At that time, signing even one harmless petition supported by left-wing groups could get you interrogated by the FBI for the rest of your life and blacklisted from working in government or even in Hollywood. That's why Americans weren't really afraid that Tesla had invented some kind of secret death ray. What they really feared was that his papers and notes might end up in Soviet hands through Kosanovic and Yugoslavia. And remember, the Cold War, the arms race, and then the space race were just around the corner. Every single scrap of paper with Tesla sketches could be treated like a potential gold. By the way, that will also be the subject of my next film. A bit longer one, so forgive me if recent uploads have been irregular, but trust me, this one is going to be big. I'm gathering everything to put it into one huge episode, and it's almost done, so when you see the next notification, you will know. In Washington, the fear was simple, that the genius inventor's notes might suddenly land in Soviet hands. And then silence. Tesla papers gathered dust in government's archives, while the average person associated electricity with Edison. His name was plastered in neon across the first mass advertisements for electric power. It took decades for Tesla's strange revival to begin. Not thanks to scientists, they have never forgotten him. It was all thanks to marketing. When Elon Musk took Tesla's name and slapped it onto futuristic cars, the world suddenly remembered. Hey, Tesla, wasn't Tesla that guy with electricity and crazy ideas? Sort of a patron saint of conspiracy fans? Let's bring him back! Today, Tesla's name is everywhere. It's in school physics textbooks and in units of magnetic induction, because magnetic fields are measured in Teslas. Few people realize how big a unit that is. For comparison, Earth's magnetic field is only about 0.00005 Teslas. That's why scientists also use Gauss. 1 Tesla equals 10,000 Gauss, which makes Earth's magnetic field sounds like a more tangible half a Gauss instead of absurdly tiny decimal. It's a bit like radioactivity measurements. We have the Curie and the Betrayal depending on the context. That's a whole topic for another video. Let me know. Would you like to hear about Marie Skłodowska-Curie? And why Gauss at all? Partly because of historical convention, but also because in the 19th century physics was measured in the CGS system, centimeters, grams and seconds. That's where the units comes from, through conversions and reductions. That's why you have meter, no centimeter, you have kilogram, no gram, etc. But to wrap it up, I can't help but wonder, what would Nikola Tesla say if he saw us today? Watching YouTube, having internet, streaming 4K movies through invisible Wi-Fi waves, talking to people on the other side of the planet, and not even thinking twice about it. Maybe he would just smile under his mustache and think, so I was right after all. These invisible waves are real, only instead of free energy, you ended with subscriptions and internet bills. That's poor, but I don't know. Let me know in the comment section what do you think about it. Talking around 2 hours about Nikola Tesla in English is sick for me, but I'll do my best to bring you even better content, so subscribe and see you next time. Bye.